Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Fox News.
Welcome back to Israel Unplugged. This is Josh Wander speaking on remote location from the northern heights of Israel. We just went through an incredible tour. First, we went to Ramat HaNadiv, the area in which the Baron Edmund Rothschild is buried, and he has a beautiful garden. The story is absolutely, if anybody has not done this yet and comes to Israel or is here in Israel, they should do this. The story of Baron Rothschild is absolutely incredible. What he did to build this country, it's absolutely amazing. And now we are up in Zichron Yaakov, and we just went to the Aronson House, another amazing story of the underground that fought against the Turkish forces and brought the British to Israel in order to get rid of the Turks. And just amazing stories here, amazing, beautiful scenes. I don't want to make anybody jealous who's not here. Maybe I do. Maybe that's the point, to make people jealous. But either way, I'm excited to be here with you today. And I'm here with my co-host, Rabbi Moshe Lichtman, who I believe is still in Beit Shemesh.
Yes, and very jealous. You made me jealous. I want badly to go on a vacation, but unfortunately it doesn't look like it's in the cards for the near future. But Baruch Hashem, I'm still in Eretz Yisrael. I'm here in Beit Shemesh, and we're going to have a great show set up for you, and we hope you enjoy.
This is a live show. If you happen to be stuck in North America and you would like to call in with your comments and questions, the number will be 301-768-4841, 301-768-4841. If you are lucky to be here, fortunate to be here in the land of Israel, the number is 02-650-0151, 02-650-0151. This, of course, is the Israel Unplugged show, and this is where we bring you on all the unadulterated facts of where we're holding in the redemptive process, focusing primarily on the ingathering of the exiles. We are excited to be here today with you and bringing you some really exciting stories and news about the future and the present. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with you.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Israel Unplugged. There is some amazing news. There is a mass exodus that is happening as we speak. A mass exodus of Jews from the masses of Jews that are in New York and Los Angeles. They are all getting up and they are leaving. It is an amazing news. You're hearing it here first. Well, not exactly first. There is a series of articles about it, including in the Wall Street Journal, about how Orthodox Jews are leaving. And they're leaving for better jobs, cheap housing, and unique school choice programs. And they are all getting up and leaving. Unfortunately, they are not leaving to where they're supposed to be leaving, which is, of course, the land of Israel. Instead, they are leaving Brooklyn, they are leaving Los Angeles, and they are moving to Florida, because Florida, it seems, is the chosen land of today. And they have chosen Florida over the land which God has chosen, which we all know where they should be headed. So that all that means to me is that we are failing at our job of trying to educate and inform Jews around the world of where they're supposed to be moving to, because they clearly did not get the message if they chose to move to Florida.
Unfortunately, they're not getting. It's not that they're rejecting the message; they're not even getting it. That's the problem. They are not even hearing that message. It's a non-issue, unfortunately, in some communities. It's not even something that they think about. It's not even a choice for them.
I want to say something about that. I feel that we are always speaking to the choir, because people that are listening to the show probably didn't by accident just turn it on. They probably know what it's about. They probably, know what our feelings are about Jews moving to Israel. And I think it's really important that everyone who is listening make sure that they go and they get other people involved. They get other people to listen to the show. They go to our websites of itstimetolive.com and toratzion.com, and they go and they spread the message to others, because it's not enough preaching to the choir. You already know, if you're listening to this show, what should be done, whether you're here already or whether you're on your way here. But we need to get the message out to the masses.
100%. And, you mentioned my website, toratzion.com. So, I don't have as fancy, beautiful videos that you have on your website, which I love. I love listening to those videos of some really special speakers, special gedolim, great leaders of our time, calling upon Jews to think about the issue of making Aliyah and how important it is. My website is a little different. It has books. That's what I've been doing. I've been putting out books for the last 25 years or so on the importance of living in Israel. And I also have a collection of articles. Whenever I see an article that really catches my eye, that really inspires me. Before I decided to make Aliyah, when I was just in yeshiva and I was, going back and forth, I remember when my rabbis would give a really fiery Zionistic speech, I would just cringe, and I would want to just bury myself. And then one day I made the decision that I'm staying, and after that, one of my rabbis gave this amazing Zionistic speech, and I felt so good. I just felt like on the top of the world, So every time I read these articles, and I have a whole collection of them, I just feel so good about my decision. And I know that it makes maybe some other people feel uncomfortable, but, this is what we're here for. We're here to make people understand that there's one truth. There's only one truth, and that is God's truth, the truth of the Torah. And the Torah tells us very clearly where we belong. So one of these articles,
my favorite titles of any book of all time was Rabbi Meir Kahana's title, Uncomfortable Questions for Comfortable Jews.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Definitely. Unfortunately, there's many people who see Rabbi Meir Kahana's name and, think that he's an extremist. And, I'm not saying he wasn't in a certain way, but, it doesn't mean that the Torah that he wrote wasn't true. It just means maybe his methods were, less acceptable, but there's truth and there's truth. So 100%, I agree. So one of these articles is really one of my favorites. It's called "Why Israel is My Home." It's a article that I found in a magazine, not a very popular magazine, by a certain organization, Pnai. It's called The Bridge, and they have this article by a Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, and this rabbi was born and bred in the United States, as we'll see in a minute when I'll read part of the article. And he then came to Israel for the year and then really stayed for a long time and learned here and got married to an Israeli woman and really spent even more years in Israel than he did in America. And then he took 2 years of a shlichut, of to be an emissary and teach Torah in America. And he actually went to Florida. You were talking about before Florida. He went to Boca Raton, Florida. I think it was Boca Raton, somewhere in Florida. And the article basically says, talks about it. The first part of the article, I'll read little excerpts from it. He describes how literally 2 days after he came to the United States for his 2-year stay, he was invited to someone's home for a Shabbat meal. And when he got there was this plastic bottle of soda on the table, and he poured some into his glass. And before he tasted it, he smelled it, and that smell brought back fond memories that he hadn't smelled the distinctive aroma of root beer soda for 22 years. And there was nothing like that in Israel. That happens to be, by the way, this article was written in 2000. In my store right down my block, you can get root beer soda also. But anyway, 21 years ago, there was no such thing as root beer soda in Israel. And it brought back such unbelievable memories. And then he goes through a whole thing of all these things that made him feel so comfortable, made him that reminded him of his youth, of growing up in America. And it made it to a certain degree. He felt so comfortable. The light switches and the electrical outlets were more familiar to him. The plasterboard walls that American houses are made of, as opposed to brick walls. The round doorknobs that you find in America, you don't really find so much here in Israel. Yellow school buses, something that brought back memories of his youth in America. Toll bridges, seagulls, and squirrels. There's no such thing as a squirrel in Israel. They just don't exist. And it just brings back memories. The football fields that you find in most cities in America. What he's trying to say, I'll read an excerpt. I'm trying to say that I feel comfortable here in the United States. I am on familiar turf. It all brings back many memories, and I feel like I really fit in. It's a lot of fun. And then he goes on to say this, despite that fact, he still has spent more years of his life in Israel than in America. But it doesn't change the fact that he has America in his blood and his brain cells, and it's very, and then he says very straightforward, it's very good to be back. He felt good and comfortable to be back in America. And then he goes on a whole section where he talks about family. I mean, he's been living in Israel and away from family, so many years away from his family, and how good it is to be close to his parents who can help watch the kids and can get nachas, can get enjoyment out of their grandchildren, and seeing long lost cousins, and all these people. I very much can sympathize with him on that. I mean, I have very few relatives living here. I have first cousins, but all my siblings live in the States. Almost all of my nieces and nephews. It's hard, when it comes around Chagim time and you want to be with family. You don't have that. And then he goes on to say, also Hebrew, the language. He said his Hebrew is pretty good. He married an Israeli, and for many years he would only talk deliberately, only talk Hebrew to make sure he perfected his Hebrew. His Hebrew was perfect. But nonetheless, he still had to think and compose his sentences before he would go into a government office or make a phone call. And I'm sure we all, we can all sympathize with that feeling. And, you like it or not, English is your mother tongue. If you're born and bred in America, English is going to be your mother tongue. And besides that, life is so much easier in the United States. In Israel, you never know when the next terrorist attack will be. And he goes on to a whole thing, how many people he knew. He lived in the Gush, and he talked about Gush Etzion, and he talked about how many times his car was attacked by rocks and stones, and how one time they threw bricks at his front window, and how it shattered, and he had 4 children, and it was a very traumatic situation. And how life is more serious in Israel. Life and death matters for the state of Israel are always under discussion. There's always issues of, freeing terrorists. You always know somebody who that terrorist killed, right? And now they're talking about freeing that terrorist. So all these issues, he's describing how he feels so comfortable being in America. It brings back so many great memories and how much easier life is in America. So I'm going to leave you all with that thought. And please come back after the break, because if you don't, you're going to think this article is saying how, we should all go back to America. We should all stay where we're comfortable. But you'll see how everything turns around in just a few minutes.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Shalom, I'm Leah Aharoni. Join me on my show, News from the Torah. Each Sunday, we'll use the weekly Torah portion as a prism for understanding the news today. Listen to News from the Torah to gain clarity about the times we're living in and to understand your own spiritual path in the process. News from the Torah every Sunday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Okay, welcome back to Israel Unplugged, and where I left you a little bit in suspense. I'm reading from this article by Rav Hanan Schlesinger, in which he describes how he is, when he went to for a 2-year stint in America, how good he felt to be back, how comfortable he felt in America. And
where is this article published, by the way?
Again, it was in a magazine called The Bridge, put out by Pnai. Pnai was or is, I don't know if it still exists, an organization of, trying to see here if I have it here. They had different chapters. It was Parents of North American Israelis. I think that's what Pnai stands for. And it's basically, it was a forum for parents whose children made Aliyah, for them to, get together and discuss, I guess, commiserate maybe that they missed their kids. And they had, it was an organization, and they got together, and they even had a whole, as I said, a publication that's called the Pnai, the Bridge. So anyway, he then switches gears and says, so why live there? Why have I spent over half of my life in Israel? Why do my family and I have definite plans to return to Israel? Now, this was written in 2000. I can tell you for sure that he did return, because I remember one year, I don't remember which year it was, but let's say around 10 years later, about 2010, maybe 15, I was reading this to my students, and one of the guys said, oh yeah, I know him. He was a rabbi in the school I learned in, or whatever it was, and he told me all about him, that he's back in Israel and doing various different things. So I know he made it back. So he says, why do my family and I have definite plans to return to Israel? And here comes the answer. For me, life is much more than individual comfort, whether it is psychological or physical. Life is also much more than avoiding stress, danger, or tension. Life is a search for meaning. For me, that meaning is found in a connection to larger things that go beyond the individual. I am part of something that goes beyond my personal biography, and that connects my individual biography to the biographies of millions of other individuals, to something that goes beyond even those individual biographies. I am not just an isolated individual, but part of the Jewish people. In addition to my individual identity, I am part of a collective identity. That collective identity is, in a sense, even more powerful than my individual identity. Hebrew is my mother tongue, in a sense more powerful than the sense in which English is my mother tongue. Of course, what he means is, yeah, on an individual level, English is my mother tongue. But I am part of the Jewish people, and our mother tongue is Hebrew, much more than English. Israel, he continues, Israel is the land of my birth, in a sense much more powerful than the sense in which America is the land of my birth. The scenery and landscapes of the Judean hills and of the Galilee on the Golan Heights were embedded in my consciousness long before my eyes ever saw the beautiful forests of Long Island. Long Island is where he was brought up. The ways of the Torah are natural to me in a sense far beyond my familiarity with football fields, yellow school buses, or root beer soda. I am not just the sum total of 40 years of individual experience. Rather, I am the sum total of 3,000 years of experience. Within me are the experiences of countless generations that came before me. I am a link in a chain, part of a historical process. I am one little brush stroke on an exquisite canvas that provides perspective to who I am. As the chain stretches from the past to the present, it continues on as well into the future. That's also part of me, the future. My dreams, hopes, and aspirations extend not just to my 80th or 90th birthday, but to the future of the Jewish people. I plan not only for my own future and prosperity, but also for the realization of the goals of the Jewish people. In short, I am part of a continuing saga, a feature-length film, functioning just on the basis of my individual experience would be as ridiculous and meaningless as taking one frame of a film without seeing the rest and trying to make sense out of it. And this film is being shown on the other side of the world. Well, from where he was writing it in Florida, he means Israel. The film's beginning, middle, and end are only playing in the Middle Eastern theater. There may be reflections, voices, and echoes outside of this theater, but the real movie itself is only playing in that theater. I am part of that film. Therefore, I cannot do anything but live my life as part of that film. The Jewish people's roots are in the land of Israel that was promised to us as a historical laboratory of ethical monotheism, where God revealed to Abraham the vision of a just society and challenged him to build a nation that would realize that vision. There, the Torah, the constitution for such a society, was meant to be put into practice. There, today, meaning here in Israel, today, we are holding high the banner of that ancient mandate, endeavoring to be true to the past while building the future. This mission was derailed for almost 2,000 years. We were scattered among the nations, left to nurture the vision and fan the flame, hoping to return one day to the stage of history, our homeland in Israel, to renew our relentless pursuit of the divine ideal. The greatest luminaries longed and pined throughout 2,000 dark years of exile to come home to a Jewish kingdom in our holy land. Maimonides, Rashi, Nachmanides, and the Vilna Gaon treaded water in the lands of our dispersion to prepare for the days of the ingathering of the exiles. Well, that day has arrived. Shall I ignore it? Shall I turn my back? Shall I pretend as if our hopes and prayers of 2,000 years have not been brought to fruition? Shall I make believe as if the divine vision of a kingdom of priests and a holy nation was meant to be realized in Long Island or in Boca Raton? Shall I not be thankful that I merited to be born in a century that has witnessed the birth of a nation out of the putrid smoke that arose from Auschwitz. The dry bones of Dachau have been revived to take on flesh and blood. The ghost of the Jewish nation has arisen from the dead. Shall I be apathetic? Shall I not rejoice? Shall I wait on the sidelines? To do so would be hypocritical. It would mean to profess one thing and to live something else. It would mean to pray 3 times a day for a ticket on El Al to Israel and for a vote in the Knesset elections, and then to turn down the ticket and refuse the voter registration card when offered to me by God. It would be more than hypocritical. It would be to ignore who I am. It would be to favor my individual physical identity and to ignore the larger tapestry of who I am. My I is part of a larger chain of we and us. Without the we and the us, my lifeblood would stop flowing and the source of my vitality would dry up. I'd be cut off from the wellspring of my true collective being. For all that, I am willing to sacrifice root beer soda and yellow school buses. And that is the article that I wanted to share with you. What do you think, Josh?
Amazing. Absolutely incredible. I actually spoke this past Shabbat, and I came up with a mashal. I came up with this parable. And I said to the group that I was speaking to, I said, I'm a scalper. I'm somebody who sells tickets, and I'm offering tickets to the Super Bowl. And you can have 2 types of tickets I have to offer. One is a ticket that's way up in the bleachers, all the way up on top of the stadium. It's in a box, and it's air conditioned, and it has all the food and drink you can imagine. It has a beautiful screen where you can watch the game, and you even have binoculars where you can look deep down into the field and see what's going on. But you're up there in the bleachers. That's one option. The other option is I have these tickets that are right on the 50th yard line, right in the game. You're like sitting and you're part of the game. Which one do you want? So anybody who knows anything about a football stadium would obviously pick the tickets that are on the 50-yard line and you're actually in the game. So I said, those are the options that are being given to the Jewish people today. You can have everything you want, all the comforts of life up in the box, up in the bleachers, and it could be very comfortable, but you're looking from afar. You're looking at a screen. You're not a part of the game. You're just a bystander. You're somebody who's watching from afar. Or you can be part of the game. You can be an active participant in the game. And those are the choices that are given to the Jewish people today. And those are the choices that people have to make, whether they want to be part of the game or whether they want to sit back in the bleachers where all the pleasures of life may be, but they're just bystanders and they're not actually involved at all in the game. And I think if that's presented to people the right way, people may understand what's going on. Please stay with us because the next and the last segment is going to be hopefully our best one. So stick with us.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Okay, welcome back to Israel Unplugged. During the break, Josh and I were talking about shlichut because this article was from this Rabbi Schlesinger was when he was on shlichut. So I was mentioning, that thank God I have a bunch of grandchildren here in Israel, and two of my grandchildren are in Canada now on shlichut. So we were talking about. Josh mentioned how very often people who go on shlichut are not the most die-hard Zionists, and they sometimes end up staying there. But in reality, and I think it's very shocking even. I mean, if you read, I didn't read most of the first part of the article, but he really was saying how comfortable it is in America and how everything brought back such great memories. I don't think that that's happening anymore. I think that, America for the Jewish people is falling apart. Like you yourself started this show by saying how there's this mass exodus. Now, of course, it's very sad that they're not moving to Israel, but they're leaving, New York. New York was the center of the Jewish people for such a long time. Why are they leaving New York? Because things are happening. Things are not as comfortable as they used to be, and they're looking for other places to go. So it's really...
I think on both sides. I think it's becoming less comfortable to be a Jew in America today, and it's becoming that much more comfortable. As you mentioned, you can get root beer in the local store here. It's becoming much more comfortable to be here in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not so worried. I also mentioned that my son, who God willing was going to get married in about 2 months. He's planning on, him and his future wife are planning on going on shlichut. I'm not worried that they're going to get stuck there. They're really going for the right reasons to try to have an influence on diaspora Jews and teach them Torah and teach them Zionism also, teach them the importance of living in Israel. So, this also leads into an idea. One of the things that Rabbi Schlesinger said in the article was, to be offered an El Al ticket and voter registration, what an amazing opportunity that is, and then to turn it down, how terrible that would be. So actually this issue of voter registration, of the zechut, the merit, the privilege to be able to vote is really connected to this week's parsha, because in this week's parsha we have the mitzvah of appointing a king, right? And it starts with the words, "When you come to the land that the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it, etc., and you say, I will set a king over myself, like all the nations that surround me." So there it says, it gives a few criterion of this king. It says, "You shall surely set over yourself a king," meaning you are allowed to, if you desire to appoint a king, you can do so. In fact, it's understood to be one of the 3 mitzvot that is incumbent upon the Jewish people to do when they come into Israel. They have to destroy the remnant of Amalek, they have to appoint a king, and build the holy temple. So, again, the criterion are, you shall surely set over yourself a king, whom the Lord your God will choose. From among your brethren you shall set a king over yourself. You may not place over yourself a foreign man who is not your brother. So it sounds like what it's saying is that you have to appoint a Jew and not a foreigner, not a non-Jew. So in my book, Eretz Yisrael and the Parsha, I quote the Sifrei. The Sifrei is the Midrash, the rabbis comment on this pasuk, and it says, what does it mean that you have to appoint a king from your midst? It says, not from Chutz La'aretz, not outside the land of Israel. And then when it says your brethren, means not others, and then you may not place upon yourself a foreign man, this is a negative commandment. And based on this, the sages say that one may not appoint a leader over the community unless his mother is Jewish, meaning it has to be a Jewish person. So the Rav Zalman Saratskin, he was actually I don't know much about his life, but I do know from he has a perush called Aznaim LeTorah, which I inherited. I inherited from my wife. Baruch Hashem, my wife's still alive. May she live for many, many years. I inherited it, meaning when I got married, we share our books. And this was one of the books, the set of Chumashim with the Oznaim LaTorah Perush, is something that she picked up when she was in her year in Israel in the Michlala, and the Rav Cooperman told them that they have to buy this book, and it is really amazing. Now, Rav Saratskin was part of the Agudat Yisrael. He was, in the more Haredi part of Israel, of the Jewish people here in Israel, and nonetheless, the book is filled with Ahavat Eretz Yisrael, with the love of the land of Israel. And, not Zionism in the sense of, flag-waving Zionism, but it's so clear that he believes that all the Jewish people should be in Israel. So on this piece, on this midrash and the psukim, the verses that we said, he writes as follows: From among your brethren you shall set a king over yourself. When prophecy ceases and the question of kingship arises, you should choose a king who fulfills the following criterion. Number one, he has to be from among your brethren, which means who lives in Eretz Yisrael, right? That's what the Sifrei I quoted before, the Midrash says, that he has to be from Eretz Yisrael. What does that mean? Why? Why can't you appoint a leader from New York? For one who dwells outside the land of Israel is like one who has no God. And how could he reign over the holy Jewish people? Don't forget that famous statement of the rabbis that anyone who lives outside the land of Israel is tantamount to one who has no God. So certainly someone who has no God cannot be you're the leader of the Jewish people. And then he goes on to say he should not be a foreign man who is not your brother. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean, like it sounds, does it mean an actual Gentile? So he said it can't be, because it does not refer to an actual Gentile. For how could the Jewish people appoint a king from among the nations of the world? I mean, that's so obvious that it doesn't make sense that that's what the Midrash is talking about. So what does it refer to? Rather, it means one who is estranged from the spirit of Israel and its Torah, as it goes on to explain, who is not your brother. Is not your brother, meaning he doesn't keep the mitzvot like a Jewish person should. It refers to one who
we know that a king needs to be from the dynasty of King David. So clearly, it's obvious that it cannot be a Gentile. It has to be a Jew.
Right. Correct. But what he's saying here is that it goes further than that. It says that he has to be a Jew who understands what Torah and mitzvot, what Judaism is all about. It can't be one whose deeds are estranged from heaven, from God, and he is not your brother in terms of mitzvot. I mean, that's not considered a full-fledged Jew because he's not keeping the Torah and the mitzvot. So, in other words, what it sounds like that he's saying, what this Midrash is saying, is that when you return to the land of Israel and you need to set up a government and there are no prophets to help you, make sure that the people you appoint are religious, God-fearing individuals. Now, I remember in 1992 was the first year that the first election that I was part of as an Oleh Hadash, because I made Aliyah in 1991. So the next year, that was actually a very fateful election. That's when the Rabin Peres government was formed, and the whole beginning of the Oslo Accords and all that followed, unfortunately. But I remember the Rosh Kollel, the rabbi of the Kollel that I was learning in, Rav Uri Cohen Shlita, said, he's not going to tell anybody who to vote for. That's not what a rabbi should do. But he is going to tell us from a halachic perspective, you could vote for any party you want as long as it's Jewish and religious. You can vote for Shas, you can vote for Agudat Yisrael, you can vote for the religious Zionist party, whatever you want, but it has to be a religious Jewish government. That's what a religious Jew should do. So this certainly, seems to bear this out. And I end the article with the following. Many people cite the fact that irreligious Jews run the state of Israel as a reason not to live here, right? Many people say, why should I live in Israel? It's run by irreligious Jews. In my opinion, that is ludicrous and nothing but a cop-out. If these people were really concerned, they would dafka, meaning specifically come to Israel to help improve the situation. Could you imagine what an impact a mass immigration of religious Jews would have on the Israeli political scene? Instead of a quarter of the Knesset being religious, now I wrote this in many years ago. I think it's even more than a quarter. Maybe, Josh, you know how many religious Jews are in the Knesset? Do you have any idea? What percentage of the Knesset?
I don't know. And it depends how you define religious, because there are many kippot wearers. There are a lot of ones that are not necessarily wearing kippot, but they're very, very traditional Jews. I would say that the majority right now of the Knesset are at least traditional.
Okay, that's true. But we're talking about really actually religious Jews, so it's more than it was. It's more than a quarter. But anyway, instead of so can you imagine what an impact? I'm sorry, I lost my place. Give me a second. A mass immigration of religious Jews would have on the Israeli political scene. Instead of a quarter of the Knesset being religious, half of it would be religious. We might even be able to elect a religious prime minister. So I wrote that many years ago. We do actually have a religious prime minister, but we won't get into politics here. Then there would be no concern of anti-religious laws being passed in the Jewish state. As things stand now, however, an Arab living in East Jerusalem has more of a say on the future of the Jewish homeland than an observant Jew living in Borough Park, Monsey, Teaneck, etc. So our time has run out, so we'll see you next week. Come back. Join us.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.